So this is the Aeon X, a slight departure from the standard Aeon. So this is coming in at $500, and to sum up this headphone quickly, it's probably one of the best luxury builds that you could buy for $500, as opposed to just like raw toughness. Like I think the 1990 is probably a little bit tougher, but in terms of like a luxury build, this thing is fantastic. It's got that same Nitinol headband. Now this build through in and throughout is basically the standard Aeon. There's a couple departures from the original, like the headband is a slightly different color, like the original had like this red stripe on the outside, and this one's labeled as drop/Dan Clark audio. And the pads are ever so slightly different, being perforated on the inside, but only on the front of the inside, not on the rear of the inside. And there is slightly less foam in between your ear and the driver now. And as far as what I've been told, those are just about the only changes that have happened to the Aeon X, and it's coming in at $150 less. Now, real quick, I want to send a huge thank you to Drop for sending this out early so that I could get this review out early for you guys so that you know whether or not to pick this item up. Now, outside the pads and the headband, there's not really a way for me to identify that this is an Aeon X. The branding is exactly the same. This goes for the actual kind of a headband sliders. This goes for the actual Aeon name on the side, and the color of it hasn't changed at all. So as far as functionality and quality, it's exactly the same Aeon, which is a great thing. Now to quickly talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, I reviewed the standard Aeon a while ago, and I didn't like it. In kind of harsh, simple terms, it was really boring. Plain as that. And the X here, I feel like they've maintained kind of the characteristics of the Aeon, but made it just a hair more fun. It's a little bit more lively. I feel like the treble is a little bit clearer, which is what the reduction of the actual foam between your ear and the driver are. You still get the tuning pad, so you can still kind of filter the sound to be a little bit towards your preference. Although my preference, and I think with the standard Aeon, was without it. I do like the added clarity of not having any more foam in between my ear and the driver. And the bass response, I feel like, is a slight departure from what was pretty much deadpan neutral, in my opinion, on the standard Aeon, and is now a hair more fun, just a little bit more fun, a little bit more brought up. So you get a headphone that's sprayed a little bit warmer than neutral, but towards my preferences and what I like, that's actually perfect for me. And this has become, especially at the price range, a headphone that I really, really enjoy using. It's quite good. Although, like every headphone, it's not perfect. So as far as the sound signature that you can expect with this, it's fairly wide. It soundstages quite nicely, but some of the vocals are a little bit stepped back. Think of kind of the vocal placement, although it's not nearly as wide, but think kind of like the vocal placement of like the HD 800S. That headphone has similar characteristics of the vocalist being a little bit more stepped back. Now, with the vocals here, it is, again, going to be a slightly warmer experience. Now, while I do like the actual tonality and sound of the vocals, it's not as forward as I would personally prefer, but it is still quite good. And from a technical perspective, as long as you don't need that step forward performance, I think it is quite nice. It actually reminds me a lot of the DT 1990 vocals, which I'll be doing a separate comparison video that's a little bit more in depth than this one is. Okay, now when it comes to the treble performance, the treble is super crispy up until about 10K. And then similar to the standard Aeon, it actually kind of just drops off a lot after 10K. There's really not a lot of frequencies that are displayed in an easily accessible manner above 10K. So this ends up being part of why the sound signature is overall a little bit warmer, but it also leads to a pretty pleasant, very non-fatiguing headphone. And the way that the treble is displayed on below 10K region is surprisingly resolving. In fact, I think below 10K, it is on par with the DT 1990 in terms of detail and resolution. Not quite as forward as the 1990. That's a little bit more forward, but actual quantifiable information, I think, is pretty good on this. So that leaves me with a little bit of a split decision here for the treble response, because on one hand, I say that, okay, technically it is not kind of quite as filled out as other headphones are, so it's going to get you knocked some points for that. But on the other hand, it's an extremely pleasing treble response, although again, not all that complete. So I'm going to be kind of putting this one in that category of like, it's enjoyable, but not technically superior. And this is going to be the same thing with the bass response. The bass response is enjoyable. It's actually more than a similar priced headphones like the 660S. It has more. This is even a little bit fuller sounding than the DT 1990, although both of those headphones handle the bass in a kind of cleaner, better resolving capacity. This is somewhere in between the 1990 and the LCD 2C in terms of bass quantity. The 2C has more and does cost more. And I think the 2C is also a bit cleaner whilst having more bass. And this doesn't really handle bass the best in the price range, but the quantity is undeniably a pleasing amount. Although there is a bit of a upper bass kind of boxiness that can encroach in a few songs. Now, I only really noticed that when I was really analyzing the music, but it didn't really ever take me out of it. It was just when I had to start paying attention to, like, okay, what frequencies are doing this and what frequencies are doing that. That's when I start to pick that up. So imaging and soundstage, the headphone that I can most similarly equate this to is actually the Modhouse Argon. In terms of, like, it's a wide sound, but it definitely feels like there's a boundary to how far it can go. And it doesn't quite have that open, endless sound that a lot of headphones can have. Not necessarily total width, but they just sound like they are forever open. This kind of feels like there's a globe or some sort of box kind of enclosing where the sound can happen. But within that box, it's got great layering. It's got great representation at all angles. You've got that, 360-degree circular sound, which makes this great for gaming in movies, as well as music that takes advantage of good sound staging recordings. Okay, so where do I place this in terms of other headphones at this price range? So one thing is the build. Like if you're in it for a kind of tangible luxury experience, not necessarily a headphone that you can drop 1,000 times like I feel like you can do with like some of the Behrs and the Sennheisers. Those things just are bulletproof and they last forever. This doesn't quite have that level of toughness, but in terms of like a luxurious feeling to it, I do think that this is probably the best built headphone for that, around $500. And this mostly has to do with the design as a whole, the ear-shaped cups, the quality of material used, the Nitinol headband, and the clamp force, and still being lightweight, and the type of connectors it uses. It just all feels quite good in the hand. Now, when it comes to sound, if you want more details, I would stick with the 1990. If you want a better mid-range, I would stick with the 660S. But if you kind of want something in between those two, where the treble is a little bit more forward up until 10K, compared to the 660S, and you like kind of more soundstage backed up vocals, but you don't want quite something as analytical as the 1990, I think this is a good middle ground. I don't think it's going to be the most superior headphone in terms of sound quality as, in totality at the price range, but I do think it's a great addition to maybe a headphone library that you might already have. And $150 off the standard Aeon is great to see. And while it's not perfect, I do think it is a big enough departure from the original to be quite a bit more fun, in my opinion. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up. Thank you very much for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.